Synagogues, the venues of Jewish religious and community life, are outstanding parts of the architectural heritage of multinational cities in the Carpathian Basin. One could state unequivocally that these houses of prayer, hidden either in our city centers or in the suburbs, are among the undiscovered treasures of Hungary. In the first three parts of our series, we dealt with the Jewish heritage of Pannonia Province and medieval Hungary, as well as the Age of Enlightenment and Jewish emancipation. The most beautiful synagogues of the Austro-Hungarian Empire could be seen in the third episode. Our guide is Rudolf Klein, an architectural historian, professor at St. István University, doctor of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and visiting scholar at several universities around the world.
Bratislava, or in its original name Pressburg, Pozsony, Pozsona, has had a very long Jewish history. The Hungarian king Andrew III granted the Jews the right to settle in 1291. And already in 1335, the Cistercian monks filed a complaint against the synagogue that they were disturbed by the noise.
Persuaded by the Cistercians in 1360, King Louis the Great expelled the Jews from Hungary, even though his decree was subsequently withdrawn. In medieval Hungary, the golden era of Jewish life was during the reign of King Mátyás Corvinus. In the year when the Turks invaded Hungary, Queen Mary expelled the Jews from Hungary again. In 1526, following the defeat at Mohács, she and her court escaped to Bratislava.
Hungary became part of the Habsburg Empire. Bratislava was for quite a long period the seat of the Hungarian Diet. Practically, it was the capital city. Bratislava, or at that time Pressburg or Pozsony, was a very important Jewish center, a center of Jewish thought highlighted by Hatam Sofer, the great rabbi and scholar.
After preserving their customs for so long, the Jews gradually turned away from their traditions. Following the Age of Enlightenment, Jews tried to integrate into Christian society. One of the best-known opponents of this integration was Sofer Hatam. Despite the intellectual and spiritual heritage of the Jewish community in Bratislava, architecturally little recalls their presence in the city.
This big avenue in front of us was once upon a time the Jewish street. It's a very typical setting that on the one hand we have the castle, royal castle, and on the other side we have the burgher city. And the Jews settled between the two. And this was the way that they visited the marketplace in Bratislava, Pressburg.
During World War II, the Jewish quarter, under the castle of Bratislava, which had been one of the oldest parts of the city, was completely destroyed.
This is the place where once upon a time the Neolog Synagogue stood, which was constructed in 1863. Along the same street was a bit further on the left-hand side the Orthodox Synagogue. The Neolog Synagogue was a landmark, partly hiding St. Martin's Cathedral with a statement of the Jews, "We are here."
The Catholic Church-type synagogue was built in Moorish Revival style in 1893. Its two towers were defining elements of the townscape. The nearby city of Trnava also has a lengthy Jewish history. The city used to be a cultural center of Hungary. Péter Pázmány founded a university here in 1635.
We are on the main square of Trnava, or in Hungarian Nagyszombat, or in German Tirnau, a historic place where one of the first universities were established in Hungary, in the Hungarian kingdom.
The Orthodox synagogue has no towers. Its facade is simple. The only exterior decoration is the tablets of law. The closed mass building with its gable roof reflects the modesty of the community. Orthodox communities often built places of worship similar to this one.
The Orthodox synagogue in Trnava was erected in 1892 on the place of an earlier edifice, which was probably built in 1831. The synagogue is a center of a Jewish ensemble which contained the yeshiva behind us, a mikveh, and a big Jewish courtyard in front of the synagogue. The Orthodox synagogue is more restrained in terms of architectural form, in terms of architectural language. It is quite modest, with a central bima, with the mechitza, division between the men's and women's space.
By 1910, more than 750 towns had at least 50 members in the Jewish communities in Upper Hungary, today's Slovakia, and 95 towns and villages had several hundreds of them. On the eve of World War II, nearly 137,000 Jews lived in Slovakia. They constituted approximately 4% of the population.
Across the street, there is another synagogue built in 1897, which is the status quo ante, designed by the famous Viennese architect Jakob Gärtner.
The status quo ante synagogue belongs to the group of Catholic Church-type synagogues. Its towers, considered a conservative solution at the time, and its elongated nave and narrow aisles were well suited to the status quo ante community. While a significant number of urban Jews actually assimilated into Gentile society, the majority of the similarly large Jewish populations in smaller towns and villages upheld their traditions. The Hajdukova Street Synagogue in Bratislava demonstrates this conservatism. Yet behind its simple neoclassical facade, there is an exciting proto-modernist synagogue and a newly opened Jewish museum.
We are in the Jewish Community Museum of Bratislava, which is by all likeliness the newest one in Europe, established in 2012. It represents a Jewish history of the city, involving a general history of Hungary.
The Bratislava Jewry, split into Orthodox and Neolog communities, numbered more than 15,000 people before World War II. The community greatly contributed to the economic and cultural development of the newly formed Czechoslovakia after World War I.
What is special about this museum is the link between the synagogue space and the museum. The museum is actually the women's gallery, which is let open to communicate with the airspace of the synagogue. So in the museum, you hear what is happening downstairs and vice versa.
At the same time, anti-Semitism was smoldering under the surface, and the idea of Zionism gained adherents among the Jews.
The first two synagogues were built on the main Jewish thoroughfare, and they were demolished in order to create a highway that bisects the city. This synagogue was built between 1923 and 26. The architect was Salatnai, or in Slovakian, Slatinsky. The synagogue is an interesting mix of Orientalism, neo-Baroque around the 20s, a bit of Czech Cubism. While architecturally, basically, this is a 20th century building, the bima refers to the medieval bima of the Altneuschule synagogue in Prague, with that establishing a continuity and referring to the new state of Czechoslovakia. This is the third modern times synagogue in the city, and the only one that survives.
Between 1939 and 1945, independent Slovakia deprived 80,000 Jews of their civil rights. Josef Tiso's government paid 500 Reichmarks to the Gestapo for each deported Jew, which is unprecedented in Europe. Nevertheless, some Jews still survived the Holocaust. Until the deportations, the life of Jews in the southern cities of Hungary was much more bearable than their fellow countrymen's lives in Slovakia. Szeged was the home of the most significant Jewish community of the southern Great Plain, where Jews could be elected into the city council since 1861. By the early 20th century, the nearly 6,000-member Jewish community of Szeged had become one of the country's most powerful Jewish communities.
Szeged has been one of the major centers of the southern part of the Hungarian kingdom, and it was known already in the medieval period. There are some medieval buildings left. The evolution of the city accelerated after the Great Flood in 1879. For this occasion, the emperor came here and made a pledge that Szeged will be a great city. And really, urban planners and architects came and redrew the city. They formed a large main square, drew rings around the city center that, due to World War I and the recession, never got fully realized. The first significant public building, the City Hall, was actually renewed by Ödön Lechner, who was the teacher of Bamhon Lipot, the architect of the synagogue. And we can see some continuity between the formal language of the two.
The classicist Szeged Synagogue, designed by Henryk and József Lipovsky, is a magnificent Jewish place of worship. It is located on a street corner, but its entrance faces the courtyard.
The Jewish community of Szeged was established in 1791. The city was already a royal free town. And they erected the first synagogue around 1800, which is completely forgotten. The first remarkable synagogue was constructed in the 1830s. This is behind me, a large neoclassical edifice, which is the predecessor of the large Art Nouveau synagogue.
Leopold Baumhorn was Europe's most productive synagogue builder. He designed 22 synagogues at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. One of his most important works was the new Szeged Synagogue, in which Neo-Romanesque and Neo-Gothic elements blend with Art Nouveau. In addition to the Lechner-type brick ribbon ornaments, one can identify all sources of contemporary free style on his building.
The Synagogue of Szeged is considered by many as the apex of Hungarian synagogue architecture. This is actually a grand finale of a period of Jewish emancipation, optimism, wealth, and accumulation before the big 20th century storms. The building was designed by Leopold Baumhorn, or in Hungarian Lipot Baumhorn, who was a specialist for designing synagogues. Baumhorn was a pupil of Lechner, so we have this neo-Gothic, neo-Romanesque, neo-Oriental, a bit of Art Nouveau mixed together into a tasty blend of architectural styles and actually also political statements.
We see complex forms made of brick, stone, but most of all tin. All this is surpassed by the stunning color effects of the interior.
The synagogue has a large central dome and 4 smaller turrets which emphasize the significance of the dome.
The ark and the spacious bima are the jewels of the temple. The colonnade and the square-shaped interior leads to the richly decorated ark and bima. Still, the most beautiful part of the synagogue is perhaps the inside of the dome.
The synagogue stands on its own plot, which is quite rare in early 20th century Hungary and actually in the whole Habsburg Empire.
Similar to the synagogue, The community building is also very imposing. While its exterior does not exceed the aforementioned Lechnerian forms, its Great Hall is one of the finest in the country. The beauty of the Szeged Synagogue and community building is rivaled only by the Dohány Street complex in Budapest. People of Israel had come a long way before synagogues became a site of worship. This building represents a magnificent station on that journey.
By the end of the 19th century, Pest Jewish community outgrew the Dohány temple, both in physical terms and in metaphorical. The temple, which was stuck between the row of houses, didn't represent anymore the strength and significance of the community.
Although the percentage of the Jewish population in Hungary did not exceed on average 6%, 23% of the population of Budapest was Jewish at the beginning of the 20th century.
Initially, they toyed with the idea to build a new, large synagogue. The new synagogue would have been built in the Lipótváros district, the place where the most important Jewish families lived. Two competitions collected the most important designs of the period, but neither of them was good enough to be constructed. So around 1910, the Jewish community took the decision to abandon the idea to construct a 4,000-seat super synagogue, and instead they decided to build smaller district synagogues scattered in the city and to enlarge the complex of the Dohány temple.
The huge three-nave basilica, with 2 galleries and 3,000 seats, is the largest synagogue in Europe. Modern contemporary structures, cast iron pillars and timber parts are coated with oriental ornamentation. After the cooperation between Ludwig Förster and the congregation ceased, the interior painting and the ark were designed by local Friedrich Wessel.
In the meantime, World War I happened, and thereafter the revolutions, which resulted in a harsh anti-Semitism. The Jews felt that they had to prove their Hungarian allegiance, and they started enlarging the plot. First the museum was built, then the arcade, ending up with a little heroes' temple, which commemorated the heroism of Jewish soldiers fought in World War I.
It could be considered symbolic that the Dohány Street Synagogue was built on the plot where Theodor Herzl, visionary of the Jewish state, was born. Still, the idea of returning to the ancient Jewish homeland and founding a modern Jewish state was rejected by the majority of Hungarian Jews, as they considered Hungary their homeland.
The history of the Jewish Museum of Budapest goes back to 1914, when a flat was rented in Holt Street for the first display of Judaica in Hungary. Later, after World War I, it became urgent for the Hungarian Jews to reinforce the idea of their faithfulness to the Hungarian cause, to their assimilation to the Hungarian culture, and the Jewish Museum in this setting was answering this need.
After the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, Jews received unprecedented opportunities to strengthen their position in society. Still, at the beginning of the 20th century, the world started to change.
This is the Hungarian Holocaust Memorial Center, erected in 2004, in the courtyard and around the synagogue in Páva Street, designed by Leopold Baumhorn in 1924. This is one of the first synagogues built in courtyards. After World War I and the introduction of anti-Jewish legislation, synagogues stopped to appear on the squares and prominent urban spaces and started to hide. This hiding was either in a courtyard or in little streets, and synagogues were open mainly to the courtyard.
The relatively large synagogue does not have towers, domes, or turrets. There are only windows on the Tuzolto Street facade, recalling the golden age of Ödön Lechner. Yet the interior is markedly different. A modern reinforced concrete structure appears, concealed by the traditional ornamentation.
In order to fit in better in the urban fabric, the synagogue has an irregular plan. The nave has a rectangular plan, but the aisles circumscribe a triangle. And with that, as we go along the longitudinal axis, first the space extends and then it narrows down to the Aron HaKodesh.
The synagogue has been refurbished. The Hungarian Holocaust Memorial Center, which is also hidden from the eyes of people walking on the street, was built around the synagogue. The center's walls lean outwards and are covered with stone, reminiscent of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. The synagogue is a venue for exhibitions and cultural events. The glass pews on the ground floor are mementos to the massacred Jews.
Period Jewish communities became increasingly inward-looking due to the persecution, and it is reflected in the architectural language. In terms of decoration, we have a sort of freestyle mixed with Art Nouveau on the one hand, and on the other, we do have modernist concrete structure, beams, large spans, which shows that they strove towards some technology.
The Heroes' Temple serves as a memorial to Hungarian Jews who sacrificed their lives for Hungary during World War I. It was designed by Laszlo Vágó, a prominent Jewish-born architect. His modern Orientalism provides a link between the Oriental style of the Dohány Street Synagogue and nascent modernism.
Architect Laszlo Vágó, who designed the Heroes' Temple, intended to have a nice garden in front of his temple. Even in some project, he presented a reflection pool to make the Heroes' Temple look like the Taj Mahal. However, history changed his intentions. During the siege of Budapest, this was the ghetto, the heart of the ghetto in Pest, and the dead of this ghetto couldn't be brought to the big cemeteries of the city, so it became a makeshift cemetery. In front of us, we see mass graves that were erected in 1945 on the northern perimeter wall of the synagogue.
After World War I and the Versailles Treaty, anti-Semitism strengthened in Hungary. The so-called Numerus Clausus, the first anti-Jewish legislation, was introduced in 1920, followed later by so-called Jewish laws, and eventually deportations to the death camps in the 1940s. Eventually, 2/3 of the 600,000 Hungarian Jews became the victims of the Holocaust. The still surviving synagogues of the Carpathian Basin, functioning either as places of worship or fulfilling new functions, are places of historical reconciliation. They have witnessed how people of synagogues have become an organic part of Hungarian history and architecture.